All right, well, for those of you who know me, you know how much I like to talk, so you would think that I wouldn't be nervous right now, but I am, so bear with me. Well, good evening. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, and I'm forever free of alcohol, drugs, codependency, trauma, abuse, grief, and OCD. My name is Jackie. I lived my first 40 years of life dependent on myself, someone, or something. But on May 23rd, 2015, I began my new journey learning to depend on God. I grew up in a home full of love. I was not raised in church. My parents juggled careers with family life, so I was often left to make my own choices. And occasionally my sister made the choices for us. I took ownership of the good and bad decisions, but at a young age, I carried the weight of sin. I look back now, and I've never questioned my parents' love for us, but I know that I needed more guidance to make healthier life decisions, and I definitely needed a relationship with God. I had my first alcoholic drink at the age of 8 years old, usually smuggling a beer down to my dad while he mowed the lawn. The emotional and physical bullying and abuse that I had experienced by age 12 was either minimized or ignored by adults, so I just quit telling anyone. I felt sad and alone, and I found isolation as a safe space in this world. Watching my dad drink every day normalized the behavior, and I would soon discover that alcohol gave me a sense of peace, which would begin a cycle of addiction. I got mixed up in the wrong crowd at school, and drugs entered into my life. I began stealing from my parents to purchase the drugs, and to get alcohol and cigarettes, all I had to do was steal from my own home. 1 year later, I would end up in a hospital having my stomach pumped from intentionally taking alcohol and pills. I was 13 years old. I was sent to a rehabilitation center for several months, which I felt abandoned, and it created this fear of loss of control because I'm type A, very organized, perfectionist personality, and it created this OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, as a new coping mechanism. After hearing some of the patients talk about God, I was 13, but I was just ready to have a new life. So as soon as I was released, I contacted a local pastor and asked that he come to my house. Let's talk about maybe baptizing me. I had hoped that being baptized, maybe God could fix me. That didn't last very long. It was a quick fix, and I went back to using alcohol and drugs. I began high school hoping for a fresh start when a really close friend who I'd grown up with was killed. I was angry and anxious. A few months later, I flipped my car into a ditch and walked away, surviving with just minor scratches. And I began to think, maybe I'm invincible. And either God didn't care, God wasn't in control, or maybe he just flat out didn't exist. I continued my path of destruction when my boyfriend introduced me to sex and pornography. And then I ended up dating several men who were 5 to 10 years older than me, thinking I would be in a more mature relationship. By the time I turned 18 years old, carrying the weight of abuse and sin, I was left feeling broken, damaged, and run down by life. My young adult years were spent just in a constant self-destructive pattern of alcohol, drugs, casual sex, and unfortunately, some without my consent. My low self-esteem and need for love and support and just security continued to lead me into emotionally, physically, and sexually abusive relationships. One in particular, I landed on the end of my driveway, scraped from the fallout of his SUV, and he drove off laughing at me. I had never felt so weak, worthless, fearful, exposed, and ashamed. By age 22, I was pregnant. I knew the relationship was unhealthy after witnessing years of uncontrolled anger, leaving holes in the walls, broken furniture, and physical fights. So I chose to have an abortion, seeing it as the quick fix out. A few months later, my fresh start landed me in jail after getting arrested for DUI. Losing my driver's license did not slow me down. The very next weekend, I drove to party with a bunch of my girlfriends at a local racetrack where I met my husband. I jumped right into that relationship, thinking he would be the security that I needed. We moved in together just after 6 months, and we married a year later. Unfortunately, we built our marriage on a foundation of past mistakes, addiction, and trauma, and with our sights set on things that brought us instant gratification. We moved away from family and friends, and I fell into a depression. I was alone. So I came up with my next great idea. I was convinced that my loneliness would be eased by starting a family. Let's bring children into it. So during the next 5 years, I would cycle through grief, trauma, and hopelessness due to recurrent miscarriages. By the time I lost my 6th pregnancy, not only did I lose another baby, but I left out of that hospital with absolutely no hopes or dreams of having a family of my own. I was certain at this point that there was a God, and he hated me, and he was punishing me for my sin. I felt unlovable, unworthy. I was broken. And my husband, he didn't know how to comfort me, so he just pulled away, leaving me to fall apart on my own. And you know what? I locked myself away and I rarely got out of bed, but I didn't blame God. I didn't like me either. So I just fell into a deeper hopelessness, accepting that this was my life. Psalms 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed. Well, I was crushed. I stayed isolated for months until one day, and I don't know why, I got up and I started praying to God. Not with a list of demands or telling him what I needed, but just having a conversation and asking him to take control. I didn't understand that it really wasn't God who was the issue. It was me. I was not giving him control. I shared my hopes and dreams, and God would deliver on one of those dreams, blessing me with 2 children. We decided to sell out of our local businesses, move to a new town. We were going to start going to church, and we were going to start this new life as a family. We changed zip codes, but our problems followed us. We attempted sober living for the first time in our marriage, and life got more chaotic. I was exhausted, and I just wanted peace and rest, and trying to balance my needs with my kids' needs, with my husband's needs, was a challenge. And my marriage suffered because my husband was always last on the list. I was full of anger and resentment, and especially towards him. I had not healed from the damage that was caused by my poor life decisions, much less acknowledged the damage others had caused me. Life continued to throw us curves when our son was diagnosed with nonverbal autism and sensory processing disorder. This news was followed by the fact that my daughter was struggling in school and had been diagnosed with dyslexia. I was overwhelmed, and I felt like a failure, unable to provide my kids with the very thing that they needed to be successful. And slowly, all the hurt, shame, guilt, and bitterness began to seep to the surface. Our house was often filled with fighting, echoing the cycles of dysfunction that we both had brought into our marriage and now family. We were both unhappy in our marriage, further escalating each of our addictions, which led to infidelity, adding to the heaping pile of unreconciled issues between us. And I was exhausted, I was frustrated, and I was drowning in my own life, the very life that I had prayed for God to give me. Yet it wasn't anything like what I had planned for myself. I was unhappy, and I was blaming the very blessings in my life, my family, for my struggles. I slipped further into addiction, hiding away from my failures. I had prayed every day from 2012 to 2015. That's 3 years for God to fix our marriage and our family. I was convinced that if he would heal our son of autism, that our life would be easier. On Saturday, May 23rd, 2015, God answered my prayers, but not my two-dimensional Band-Aid fix. If you fix our son, our life will just get better. But his glorious three-dimensional plan that involved all of us coming to know Jesus. See, our son wasn't the problem, we were the problem. God placed a family in our lives that would lead us to a church with a special needs ministry. We attended our first Saturday night, yes, and it is a blessing. We attended our first Saturday night here at First NLR, and I will tell you, I was filled with hope. And I held on to that hope for 6 months until December 25th, 2015, Christmas Day, when my dad unexpectedly was admitted to the hospital. He died 2 days later. Cause of death, pulmonary embolism, and number 2 on the list, alcohol. I was with him when he died, sitting there just angry and confused. I was just like him, living a life in survival mode, trying to control everything around me, and using alcohol to ease and lighten the load of burden. I'd like to say I got sober right that moment. It took a few more months, but I did choose to recognize the cycle of addiction and choose a life of sobriety. And I would remain sober for 2 years until one night I relapsed on alcohol, but God pulled me back out on March 18th, 2018. The next few years, I was connecting, serving, and attending church regularly, when in 2021, I got sick battling long COVID for over 17 months. My physical and mental health had deteriorated, and I was exhausted trying to function at my normal pace. Endless and days and nights of just overthinking, planning, and stressing about every detail of my life, my family's life, trying to just gain control, turned to sleep deprivation, brain fog, anxiety, and anger. My OCD went into overdrive, while my past shame, guilt, and grief consumed my thoughts and perceptions, creating unrealistic and unhealthy expectations, not only for myself, but for everyone else as well. I knew that our church, Pastor Lane, like he said many times, mentioned we had one here. I knew we had a recovery program, but I wanted to be healed, but something was keeping me from walking through those doors here at Forever Free. Pride. Yeah, my pride was telling me that I was a complete failure because I was still broken even after getting a relationship and building a relationship with God. I was ashamed, thinking I was so damaged from my past that not even God could fix me. I was sober, but I was not healed. I had not surrendered everything to him. I was still fighting God for control, and I didn't trust him. God slowly unveiled his plan, his timing, with a perfectly placed sermon series here at First NLR titled Forgiveness, a book study for women in our church, Embracing Trust, a Forever Free Women's Process Group, and a Bible study here at the church as well for victims of abuse, Journey to Total Freedom. Every single step was perfectly synchronized to keep me supported as I moved forward in my recovery journey, trying to find peace and joy and learning to love and trust God, myself, and others. Only God could have set up such a masterful plan. Ephesians 2:10, for we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. God still had a plan for me. On December 19th, 2023, I walked into Forever Free, admitting that my life had become unmanageable. And if I didn't surrender everything to him soon, I was at risk for another huge fall. So I walked in and I fell on my pride. I'm thankful that God and an amazing recovery community were there to catch me. And as Pastor Lane said, I'm usually like, hey. I walked in and I was quick to jump into Forever Free, just super excited to be here. That's probably not the norm for many who come in here. But I was cautious about only sharing the parts of my journey I had made peace with, mainly just my alcohol abuse. I had so much shame and grief locked away, refusing to share any more personal detail because I was afraid, I was fearful that if I slipped up, overshared, that I would be judged, until I joined a process group, which helped me to open up more. Through the 12-step process group, I discovered that I had other coping mechanisms, not just substance abuse and OCD. One that had caused just as much damage along my path was that I constantly minimized trauma in my life, hiding it away while functioning in survival mode. I released so much past trauma and allowed myself to grieve all my losses in my life, including the loss of my innocence. I could forgive myself, which was a big one, and others, even the ones I once hoped would suffer in life miserably. Our family's past and current cycle of abuse and dysfunction began to heal, along with our relationships growing stronger. My first 4 months in Forever Free built a new foundation in my recovery, one full of support, acceptance, and with God in the center. Just 6 months later, on October 18th, 2024, I lost my mom. She passed away unexpectedly. This was my first time grieving a loss in my life sober. But God, he kept my heart and my mind at peace. God had prepared me for this moment, reconnecting me with old friendships, healthy relationships, and connecting me to an amazing group of women through this process group who not only pray for me every day, but they check on me every day. I realized that not only did I need God in my life, but I also needed to let others into my life, building deeper, healthy connections. I needed community within the church. God didn't intend for me to be alone in my recovery journey, and he does not want you alone in yours. So to the newcomer here at Forever Free, get connected. Tonight, start by making connections. If you've never gone to one of the groups, go to group tonight. If you struggle with making connections and you just are nervous and don't make them easily, sign up for a process group. It worked for me. You can get connected while building closer relationships and bonds as you work the steps. If you do not have a relationship with God, that's okay. Even if you have a lot of questions about God and church, we have a First Steps group, which is designed to answer questions. Join an area to serve. Sometimes we just need a break from our troubles in our lives, and serving takes the focus off of you and puts it on helping other people, which is what we are called to do. And it keeps you connected. Do not look for shortcuts. Trust me, there is no quick fix. Amen. Give yourself time and understand that all behaviors, bad and good, become habits. So give yourself grace while you're making all these changes in your life, especially when you find yourself in some life challenges and all of a sudden that new feeling is gone and you feel like your old self is slipping back into the old destructive patterns. Do not shame yourself out of recovery, but choose to keep coming back. Choose grace for yourself and start your recovery journey again, because God still has a plan for you, even when you get off track. Choose to trust his timing which brings me to work all the steps in recovery. You cannot pick and choose which steps you want to complete. The steps in the program are there to change you, and change is uncomfortable and messy. My most challenging was step 3. We make the decision to turn our lives and wills over to the higher power, the only higher power, Jesus Christ. I wanted to give God control, but I didn't know how. And typical type A personality, I followed all the instructions, I answered all the questions. We got to the end of that step, and I knew I had not surrendered control. And so that feeling that I had already failed and I should just quit and stop the process group and just quit going through the rest of the steps, it began to set into my mind. But God, instead of giving up and walking away, I stayed and I worked through all the steps. Working through these steps helped to get me out of survival mode, healing me of grief, trauma, abuse, and shame. And I did eventually give God control. It just took a while. I had to learn to trust him. My most rewarding was step 7. We humbly asked God to remove our character defects. I had worked hard for weeks on my character defects, and I felt I had been honest, and I felt rewarded for my honesty, but I had left one off the list, and God wasn't going to let that one go. So during a moment of prayer, praying for God to remove all the character defects that I had listed out, I felt a moment of conviction. I had realized that I had acknowledged how others had been verbally abusive to me, but I had not taken ownership of my verbal abuse towards my family, friends, and others. The steps, they're not always easy. Continuing to cycle through the steps is a lifetime commitment, but it brings you closer to God. It keeps you free from addiction, and it brings hope to others in our community. Seek God every day. If I'm not intentional in seeking him, I get caught up in this crazy, chaotic world trying to fix and plan and control everything. It fills me with anxiety, and it steals my joy and peace. Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Every day I wake up and I pray for God to keep me on his path for my life. And I thank him for his grace, love, and blessings in my life, including my sobriety of all substances for over 7 years. Thank you. My 16 months of freedom from grief, codependency, and shame. My continued daily strength to battle my OCD. My marriage of 25 years, my 2 children, my family, friends, my church and forever free family. I choose to surrender to God daily and to depend on him for my peace, joy, sobriety, and salvation. After spending most of my life trapped in cycles of addiction, trauma, and control, I now stand as living proof that God can redeem every broken piece. Thank you. And my story, it's not polished, it's not perfect, it never will be, but it is real. And it is being written daily by the grace of God. Recovery is not about arriving. It's about choosing to keep going, even when it's hard, knowing that God is with me every single step. I've discovered that freedom is not found in fixing everything, but freedom is found in surrendering everything. And because of Jesus, I can stay with confidence and stand in front of you telling you that I am healed, I am whole and I am forever free. Thank you guys for listening to my testimony and my story.
It was by grace I have been saved. I can never be the same.